Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and thank you especially to the National Park Service and Dr. Kahina for allowing us to do these lectures here, and a special thanks to Susan Wall for sending that message when she asked me to be a part of this lecture series. My name is Julio Encarnacion III, proud son of Gloria Encarnacion and Julio Encarnacion Jr. My grandparents' stories of the way it was one of the biggest motivators for me to learn of the past. Stories such as when bread was 5 cents and other necessities didn't even reach a whole dollar. Stories of when people would run after fish from the shore during the afternoon. My mission and vision is to preserve and promote the history and culture of the Virgin Islands through historical artifacts. I found out during these exhibits that the students become more intrigued of their ancestors. Where was the native son born? This photo right here is a 1671 French map. That was about the time, 1666, that St. Thomas was colonized by the Danes, but it was a French artist that drew out the map of St. Croix, and you could see that St. Croix was much smaller at that time, and they actually had anchor spots where the Anguilla dump fill is now. How did the native son get his name? From right here, I'm sure you're imagining where all these pictures are coming from. The Jamaican flag. I was working at a company in the States, and a lady by the name Marie Reed, who's from Jamaica, she always heard me talking about how much I miss my home and how I love the food and the hospitality of the Virgin Islands. And she shared with me this site, online radio called Streamer. And I went on it and I searched Virgin Islands, and the first radio station that I selected was 1620 AM. And at that time, Mario Seymour Head was talking about some slave narratives. And I was so interested in it, and I decided to call one time, and I would always hear that Mario would call people by Mr. Challenger or High Tech Bushman and different names. So I asked him, how I could get a name. And he said, call back. And it was about the 6th time that I called back, and he said, there is a native son calling. And from then on, I stayed with that. What sparked my interest in collecting? It was a day like this. My grandfather's brother came to our house. We were going on a fishing trip. And I'll never forget it. We caught 2 snappers and a grouper. And it was about that time to leave when my grandfather brought a truck, didn't want to start. So my grandfather told me, let me take a walk down the shore and reach home. So I'm always the person that looking to see on the ground to see what I find. And right as the waves broke, I found this jadeite stone, and it was in 2017 that we tied it back to the Mesoamerican region of Guatemala, where they would use these stones to trade with the indigenous tribes here in the territory. Some of the items in my collection consist of 356 books relating to St. Croix, as early as 1832. Rum receipts, you will see one on that corner. It's from 1805, where this person, Mr. Smith, had brought some onions to the plantations. Over 150 plus Danish West Indies coins, a gold $4 and some 12 skillings as early as 1740. Over 230 photo postcards of scenery from St. Thomas, St. Croix, and St. John. Mahogany cupboard and other furnishings, signatures from prominent figures, a meridian, pots, jewelry, and other like body stamps and ceramics. Why do I conserve? We are rapidly losing our culture, and I I would like to enforce that it's based on technology. There's a huge cause because of technology with the migration and people moving. It's happening all over the world where other cultures are being lost. I also knew that the time capsule would not be invented during my lifetime, so I started purchasing artifacts such as photos, books, and coins to better understand the past. My passion grew into a serious hobby. I enjoy seeing the smiles and listening to the way it was from others. Some of my mentors, teachers, and motivators. I like to especially, she told me not to make her famous again, but I would like to thank Nina York, and I'd like to share a story of her. Born in Frederiksberg, Copenhagen, Denmark, to writers Age and Erna Heinberg. Is that correct? She spent most of her childhood in Sweden during the World War II because her dad was doing publication on anti-Nazi publications. Later, living in Puerto Rico, her dad wanted to sort of capture the life in the Virgin Islands. And unfortunately, her father passed away before reaching St. Croix. She has made it her life destiny to capture these moments and make her father proud. I share this story with you because it relates to certain instances that change the way you live your life. Some might be sad and some might be exciting, but always pay attention and take full advantage of those instances. The birth of sugar. I'll begin to talk about, since we have such a wide history here in the Virgin Islands, I wanted to tailor it to sugar. Sugar is said to have been originated in New Guinea and then traveled its way to India, Egypt, and then Hawaii. They used the sugar in India and Egypt for ritual purposes, and then in Hawaii, they started cultivating it. Sugar crosses the Atlantic. It is said that Columbus, on his second trip, had come to Haiti and Dominican Republic and began planting the sugar cane, and then moved eastward to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands in the early 1500s. Heavy sugar production on St. Croix started as early as 1755 with export amounts of 1.5 million pounds of sugar. And in 1812, this little island that we call St. Croix was able to produce 46 million pounds of sugar in 1 year. The year ended in June. The month of June was when the crop season was over. Mules at La Grange Sugar Factory. A herd of mules preparing for a day of work. An animal that has been forgotten on St. Croix, which at one point we had over or close to 4,000 at a time. Only in Australia and New Zealand that they found in rare cases that mules were able to reproduce. Bethlehem Plantation and Sugar Factory. In 1920 through the 30s, there was a worldwide depression and sugar had ceased. The purchase of sugar had ceased. To make things worse, those years were a very dry period in the Virgin Islands, and which caused the sugar companies to close Bethlehem and Central Factory. Juice station at Estate Bethlehem. One such as this, and there were 5 on the island of St. Croix. Central Factory will use the juice that was pumped from Orange Grove Mill in Christiansted, and they will be held in cisterns in Christiansted. This is a scene from the back of Estate Prosperity, and Estate Prosperity was one of the busiest and largest plantations in St. Croix, on St. Croix, and it grew its last crops towards the end of the 1800s, 1890s. And it produced plenty of cotton during the early 1900s. First steam tractor, or what they call motor plow. There's some cases that I question some of the mature people on the island. And they said sometimes the people that work in the plantation would mistake the noise as the first planes that they saw. And Central Factory had ordered the only 2 steam tractors on the island. And it so happened that the owners of the plantation had found out that these tractors weren't working because St. Croix will seldomly have wet land, and these were made for moist land, and St. Croix doesn't have that. So they immediately sold it to Puerto Rico. And I told my parents last night that I would like to find out if I can find one of those tractors in Puerto Rico to bring it back. And this is a scene, one of my postcards here, photo postcard in Frederiksted, of a normal scene after a hard day at work in the sugar fields. So I'll begin with coaling in St. Thomas. From 1839 onwards, the steamships from the British Royal Mail had begun to travel to St. Thomas. And there was an abundance of steamships that were coming in from Southampton to St. Thomas, and bunker coal became a very important product. Mountains of coal. They said that the coal would be imported from areas of Trinidad and the north region of South America and brought to St. Thomas. And this is an actual scene of how they would be dumping the coal. Mountains of coal. Coaling continued in St. Thomas until 1935. The shipyards were largely occupied by women, and these coal carriers, these baskets would be filled with coal and could weigh up to 80 pounds of coal, and they would be able to balance them in their heads. And when they would go on to the ship, they would receive a token depending on how much they brought inside the ship. Hurricane of 1916. This hurricane really motivated the Danish government to sell the Virgin Islands because it was too costly for the recovery of the island, and that was one of the last push for the sale of 1917. The life in the Virgin Islands. People got little wages, and my grandfather tells me of the stories where the sofas would be wooden benches, and they didn't have much, so they had nothing to worry about. Nowadays, people worry about everything and don't enjoy life. I look at many pictures of St. Croix and St. Thomas and St. John, and we talk that, those were tough days in the Virgin Islands, in the plantations, but for some reason, every time I get a photo in the mail of the sugar fields or in town, their faces are always happy and smiling, such as this one here. This is in Christiansted. This is another scene in Annalee, the father and his son. And them days, this is in Christiansted, where the educational building is right now. And then I'll go about explaining some of my experiences and opportunities that I've had through many people, and that has helped me with this mission. So the first actual lecture I did in John H. Woodson was in October 2016, and it was about preserving through family members. And the students asked me different questions on how to preserve, and because they saw some of the signatures I had from governors, and I told them, even your parents' signature, you could pass that on to another family member. This was when the Daily News interviewed me in February of 2017. They reached out to me through Instagram because of what I was displaying and the culture and so forth. So they wanted me to present my content in 2 full pages for the 100th centennial anniversary. This was a 100 transfer centennial anniversary where I presented to 300 plus people and many significant people in that event. And I developed a scroll where I could bring back to the 125th and the 150th anniversary. Several scenes. of the 100 Governors reception. And it's funny, this lady is looking at her aunt in one of the photos, which is right here. This picture right here is of her aunt when the steeple was Christian State School. Governor Turnbull. This is my personal exhibit that I did on March 31st, which Mr. Schrader is enjoying some of the artifacts. Some of the deans that visited during that time was enjoying them as well. Some of the locals. And that's a scroll where I presented at the governor's reception and the personal event that I did. This was the first annual meeting for the Friends of Denmark, and you can see Senate President is enjoying the artifacts. There's Nina York again and Miss Lampe. This was at the Linkridge Park Collection Antique event. Some of the artifacts. This was March 19th of this year, where I presented on Amerindian, Danish, and early Virgin Island history to John H. Woodson. Presented to 30+ students. And you can see that that stone in the corner is what they would use to burst the woods in half to create canoes in the indigenous period. This was the 101 transfer centennial scene at Botanical Garden that I did. Presented to 400+ attendees, and they wanted me to tailor it to 1917 to 1950. Ways that I preserve, and I recommend that the younger generation does the same because we're losing our culture, is photography. That's one of the biggest things. You could see when you come up here, you'll see some photos as early as 1890 from the Virgin Islands, particularly St. Croix. And you could ask questions to your parents of how it was and keep note of those days. Record your family members. You could record it through a Zoom like this. Write down family quotes. Ask your grandparents to write you letters. Like I was in the States, my grandfather would write me send me little notes from the newspaper or anything like that. And now I would have that for my future generation. I asked them to make toys because my grandfather would tell me that just a small thing as cutting out a piece of wood as a horse head and tying a broomstick, you will have fun all day running around the house. And just read books and share it with other people. I would like to end this with David Hamilton Jackson, a picture of him in Denmark. This day was the 15th of April, and David Hamilton Jackson had traveled to Denmark to seek the betterment of the Virgin Islands and the people of the Virgin Islands. And I can remember that I told my mom I would like to be like a David Hamilton Jackson. And I told Christopher Fries from Denmark that he came here, a linguist that was studying the Crucian culture, and I told him by the 4th, I said, I would like to be like him, to speak to a crowd of people on how to preserve and promote our culture. So I really want to thank the National Park Service for allowing me to do something like this and making my dream come true. And these are my social media sites and some of the associations that when I first came here in December back from Florida, I joined these 3 groups. And some of the resource guide where I got my information from. Arnold Highfield and George F. Tyson is one of my biggest followers. And thank you, everyone.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Nina?
Do you plan to increase the visits to schools? Because I think it's really, this presentation lends itself so well to sparking an interest among young people.
Yes, definitely. I always ask my mom, since she works there, once in any time that I could stop by, and then other teachers that have come to the exhibits will tell other teachers, and they're thinking of even carrying it to a country day and Good Hope School. And also the Commissioner of Education have reached out to me to do some more of like a recording of the older people that are in the Virgin Islands and then release this information to the school. So yes, definitely.
I have another question.
Yes.
How do you store these artifacts safely? So from what elements?
Well, all my artifacts are in acid-free containers, especially the paper. They're obviously raised at least 6 inches from the ground in case of a storm or anything like that. You could keep it from moisture. I always keep those little, it's like the moisture packets. I try to get a bunch of those and put them inside because of the climate we have here. It's definitely a harsh climate for these type of artifacts, but I keep it sealed. The books especially, I try to open them ever so often so that in case of mold that might try to lay on the covers, just open it ever so often so that that mold would not stick to the pages and then cause stains to the pages, because that's one my books is one of my pet peeves. I put on gloves and everything to touch my books. Vegas.
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention also, the native son is currently, we're looking at a current possible proposal with the native son to have an exhibit put on in the fort. Part of bettering our visitor experience is also to have some local art, some local history, some cultural stuff, so that it can be exhibited and protected. I think he made a good point when he said we're losing a lot of our history with a lot of changes that's going on. So this is something that we want to add to have a better communication and education to the local students that come in to understand, see what's here. So hopefully soon we should be able to exhibit it in the book.
Yes. Okay. No, I'll definitely, I'll be writing a proposal so that the students are allowed to come in, and ever so often I would be able to tour the give the tour, personal tour to students, book reading. As I said, I have over 356 books that need to be read to the people of the Virgin Islands so they could truly understand how it was. Some of the books that I have is that I like to collect are journals of attorneys that came to the Virgin Islands, or even invalids that came from New York, especially because of they either had lung disease or the bones were brittle, and they would travel to St. Croix. And they said that St. Thomas was a very harsh place to live. Word for word, because of the buildings, the breeze would not pass between the buildings. It was heat, a lot of action happening in St. Thomas. So people of the elderly would actually move from St. Thomas after a certain age to St. Croix.
Just I know whenever you want to happen to organize a group of school kids or whatever, school kids are free. They can always go for free at the fort. So whenever you feel like you need to bring them over, be our guest. That's what we're there. Just coordinate with Benito and the park staff, and you and obviously school groups are more than welcome to enjoy their culture as a fort.
Thank you. Any questions? College students back there? I see the Jamaican shirt.
Where did you find most of the artifacts?
Well, when I was living in the States, I would go to a lot of coin shows and different postcard shows that they would hold. And I would be the youngest person there. Everybody would see me and they recognize me. If I came again, they would say, oh, hey, there's a guy looking for the Danish West Indies. Nobody else would look for Danish West Indies. They would actually go and try to find these coins for me, and then when I came back, I would have a purchase. Most of them were purchased in auctions. throughout the States. As far as Denmark, I've met a lot of people in Denmark. Just emailing, you search for sites like auctioneers and stuff like that. And I've been able to find stuff as far as Australia, like the Peter Jackson book that I have here is a romantic history of Peter Jackson, which he was born here, but through a steamer. His father worked in one of the steamships in St. Thomas, and he traveled to Australia, and then he became heavyweight champion of the world. And he was born right here in St. Croix. But you can find him throughout the site. I have people here that donate books to me. I really like when people here sort of donate them or I purchase them, because I get a story with it. Every time I meet someone, I ask them how they got it, or I find something new. They tell me a story that they have, and that's one of the best ways: communication and sharing with the local community. But the rare stuff obviously might come from away.
So most of the stuff came from like Denmark in particular.
United States, because remember that when the Danish sold the Virgin Islands, they had many of the naval governors and civil governors that would come and change administration, and they would take some of that stuff with them. So they would have a lot more in Denmark, but it's stuff that is easily ready to purchase in the United States.
You ever thought about like the other countries that once famous, like France and Spain and the Netherlands and so French?
That would have this type of stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely have it. But it's that they, for some reason, like Scandinavia, they have a high price value on those items. For instance, if a coin is worth, say I got it for $300, they would sell it for $1,500. That's just it's a part of their culture as well. So they try to sell it at a high dollar. Any more questions?
We want to have a chance to.
Sure,
Maybe
sure.
you can tell us a little about the things that.
Sure. So this painting here, there's a lady by the name of Claire Hope who has been following me on my Instagram since I started in October of 2016. And I told her, I saw that she was able to collage different images into one. And I told her I wanted something from the Virgin Islands. I first did the one from St. Croix. And the people in St. Thomas and St. John said, where's the one from St. Thomas and St. John? So I told her, I gave her some images, and she was able to put this together. This is a slave scene of the revolt in St. John, Camille Pissarro, Alton Adams. This is the sailing ship, so we have the harbor, the Christian fort, the coal carriers, Blackbeard, Bluebeard. These are the first two nurses in St. Thomas and St. John, the market, and then this is the Canil Bay historical site. And then in this one here you have Fort Frederick, Fort Christian. I was doing a little quadrille and quadrille, so I did the quadrille scene here, Melvin Evans, William Hasty, who is our first African-American appointed governor, the three queens, James C., and then the steeple, you have some fruits here that we grow, a cane scene, and I always wanted an image of a Mokojumbi and a Hassan Kiad going towards the sugar mill. And here you have, this is an 1805 invoice of this gentleman that came to St. Croix to deliver onions to four plantations. And this is a bandmaster with his Danish uniform during 1907. And then once you come up here, if you all want to come up, I could explain some of the pieces that I have. This describes sort of like the first sales that were negotiated with the US. These are some of the albums. So it seems to be Croix. This is a 1950. This is what they call one of those spectroscope photo. Some of the pottery that we would have here, some of the Danish West Indies poster. This one is especially valuable because it has a Christmas seal. It was sent in 1916, but has the 1915 stamp. These are gold coins that were used here for the sale from the 1700s skillings. This here was made to promote the Virgin Island in the 40s. This is what this picture is actually Central Factory here on St. Croix, 1892. This is an invoice or a letter, 1800, talking about the trade of wine, the spirits for rum here on St. Croix. Some of the pottery, and this is the jewel stone that I found that was in the picture. Some of the ceramic pipes, cannonball. This is like 1600 stone jug. This is what they call an amulet or a potluck, which was the handles for a ceramic pot. And then this would be the last piece once they broke it over burials. That's the last piece that would survive. This is his 1967 medal that they gave for the promotion or the transfer centennial. And these were made here in the 50s. So yeah, this is just a sample. And this right here is actually from 1890 from Peter Jackson. It was like, they would have those in the cigarette boxes. And it's just like a little token, a pin. Very rare. I purchased it in London.
So where would you find
you have to search for it. So like for instance, you type in like Danis, D-A-N-S-K, West Indian, and then you would get more of the valuable postcards. Danish West Indies, you could search. There's Danish West Indies photo postcards. The coins, these are very valuable coins. You can find them in heritage auctions. Some of these, they were given to me or even sold to me by people that know of that I collect Danish West Indies artifacts. But most of it is that I purchased it throughout the period I've been collecting. This kind of ball here was given to me from a lady that lived here, and she's now in Arkansas. And she saw me, I actually wanted to purchase something on eBay, and she met me in Boca, where I was living, and gave me that for my collection. And this is from the 5th Transcendental Military Medal. But this is just a sample. The books are my favorite thing, so I have tons and tons of books that I could sit down and read and talk about the North Island history. Yeah. That stone, it looks like tears, but I met up with an archaeologist from the University of Alabama, and she turned the stone away, and it's actually a bird with 4 legs and the tail. That part, the black part, is the tail of the bird.
So do you have a plan of like putting out these in a museum or?
Yes, like as Benito Vegas told everyone, I'm going to submit a proposal to have these displayed so that everyone can come and see these, because having them in boxes is not going to do anybody good. This is why I doing it, to preserve the culture. I think that every time you see these things, it excites anyone to learn about this.